To explain MCP, I would want to first explain what context is. You know large language models, right? They essentially need context when you copy a document from Notion into ChatGPT. What MCP does, you can feed this context into the LLM while also separating the concerns.
This is more like tools talk to each other.
Yes, but also a little bit more than that, because in most places, MCPs focus on tools, but
Right.
the protocol has a few more things.
What's an MCP pack like? Like what does it involve?
Basically, it's up to the MCP server developer. So the great thing that this protocol did was like separate these concerns.
Is it like AI tooling has integrations and that's what MCP is?
I would say you should use tools directly and APIs directly if you want the agents and tools. MCPs is something I would recommend if you want to move a lot faster. You don't really want to do the work of controlling APIs to tools.
How would this whole MCP structure look like? How does it make it different from API?
Every MCP server will call an API. It's more of how the tools are abstracted away. The Google Drive and the GitHub integrations, I'm willing to bet that they were actually early stages of testing MCP out.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. MCP has been the talk of the town over the last many weeks, and perhaps your favorite vibe coding tool already has the support to most of the MCP servers now. But how exactly do you get started with one, and what's it really like? How different is it from rest of the other things that you've been using in your coding journey? That's exactly what we'll be talking today, and I have Siddharth from Composio with me here, who's going to break all of that stuff for us and walk us through what and how MCPs can really help us in this vibe coding journey. Hey, Sid, thank you so much for joining me today.
Awesome. Glad to be here. Happy to talk about MCP, how AI agents are evolving, and how MCP is shaping all these things.
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool time that we are in, and I'm so happy that you're here to talk about the stuff that you're working on. So let's jump right in. We've seen how from startups to large companies, everybody's inclined on building their MCP version. And off grid, we were just chatting about how you had a chance to talk to the Anthropic folks as well, who were the originators of MCP. So it's beyond what could actually mean like a very simple concept, but now it's like a very accepted protocol. Uh, I want to break this down. Like, what's MCP and how are you using it for your context? And please, no USB-C for AI. That's where every post says now. But yeah, would love to get your context.
I think to explain MCP, I would want to first explain what context is. And large language models, right? They essentially need context from the outside world to function agentically. So when you're talking to ChatGPT and when you copy a document from Notion into ChatGPT and ask it to improve it, you're giving it context of that document.
Right.
Now that's annoying. That's difficult. You can't copy paste different things into like a text box. So what MCP does is it sort of creates like a nice protocol way to plug this context in. Now this context can be like various things. This Notion doc is one example. It could be access. It could be like, hey, you want the model to know what things are going on in your Slack. You want the model to know what emails you're getting. So you need to feed this context into these very powerful, very smart, very intelligent models, so that they can then help you with your life, right? So that they can help you write the email or like delete some things, write talk or something like that. Now, there are different ways to do this. People were making APIs, people were copy pasting things, people were screen sharing, people were doing all sorts of things. What MCP did was like flip that. It basically made a protocol so that you can feed this context into the LLM while also separating the concerns. And so what this does is it gives the burden of providing the context to the LLM on the app developer. So before, when Notion, so now Notion is the one that has to handle and create an MCP server so that people can use Notion with agents and with AI.
Right.
That's what the model context protocol does. It like establishes a protocol for like giving context to LLMs.
So like sort of an instruct to get some action done, and instead of painstakingly having to have the individual do all of these actions and go set up, let's say, the webhook and the API and whatever it is. This is more like tools talk to each other.
Yes, but also a little bit more than that because the protocol is actually quite expansive.
Hmm.
Uh, in most places, MCPs focus on tools, but
Right.
the protocol has a few more things. It
Like?
has resources, prompts, tools, as well as a few other things that are in the spec and
Nice.
that are being discussed in the spec. So resources are that, hey, what is the state of this database looking like? That's a resource that the LLM can use to help answer
Hmm.
your question. Prompts are like a set of like predefined templates in a
Right.
sense, where if you want, you can have multiple prompts that direct the flow of the agent. That, hey, this is the prompt for like working with my PRs. This is a prompt for writing my
Hmm.
emails. And so
Right.
the server can store all these three different kind of things
So like a
along with.
set of actions that define how to get this tool to perform some of these outcomes for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And tools are the biggest uses, has the biggest usage of everything because LLMs call functions very well, and then
Right.
giving access to LLMs to these functions helps things
Right.
forward agentically.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. And since we were talking about it takes the burden away from this individual, rather puts it on, let's say the development or the app in general. We're talking about Notion as an example. So in this case, when Notion's building an MCP server, do they do all of these in the same package that you just spoke about, which is, hey, these are the tools and these are the definitions of the prompts and this is how they should have. So just trying to understand what's an MCP pack like what does it involve?
Yeah. So basically it's up to the MCP server developer. So the great thing that this protocol did was like separate these concerns. So if
Hmm.
you're building, let's say you're building an AI workflow for yourself, you don't have to necessarily do the same work of going in and connecting with these APIs and whatnot. You just use an MCP server for it. Now, the person who made the MCP server is the person who's been delegated the responsibility of having this logic built into the server. Now, if say there's like few open source MCP servers and they don't really
Yeah.
solve the problem very well, you can just switch out and use another MCP server. So it's like
Right.
sort of like MCP server wins and the best implementation wins. And
Right.
it's up to the server developer to choose what gets into the MCP server. Obviously,
Right.
the more the better. And
Hmm.
definitely cases where the official MCP server doesn't have a lot. So then people use the open source implementations of those MCPs.
Yeah. Can you also like build on top of an MCP? Let's say, for example, there's the official MCP server that a certain brand puts out, and you realize that, hey, no, the prompts are pretty basic, or perhaps it's not letting me do a certain action. So, what I'm going to do instead is do like a rehash on top of it, because at the end of the day, it's still code, right? So, it's like you draw a branch out of it, and then you put your own version, and then sort of merge it together. Is that something you can do with MCP's code as well?
Yeah, so that it depends on whether A, the server is open source, and
Right.
B, if the MCP server itself is self-hostable. Now,
Hmm.
there's like different transports that MCP came out with, and it's been 6 months since MCP came out, and a lot has changed because these things are changing quite fast. So
Right.
if the MCP server is like self-hostable or open source and you run it locally, you can do whatever you want with like the original thing, modify it to your liking. But
Nice. Okay.
now the new spec also has hosted MCP servers in where you basically just get like a single MCP URL and then you plug that into your MCP clients, right? Now there
Yeah.
you don't have access to the insides of the server. You just
Correct.
get the tools, you get the prompts. You
Correct.
can't change that. And
Yeah.
that's like one problem we face with MCPs, which is like, hey, you don't get that deep level of granularity
Yeah, the
that.
flexibility part, right? Like you don't get to. Nice. Okay. Because I remember that when MCPs were just a thing and it was just getting its whole widespread time, I remember that it was more like cloning a GitHub repo, right? Because your code, the MCP server, the whole
Yeah,
code as a
yeah,
package was just hosted on a GitHub repo, and all you had to do was yeah, just clone that and then use it along with a bunch of whatever you've been like coding in, which is like your windsurf or your cursor or even Claude code for that matter. So, so right now, what you say is there's also like a single URL kind of a thing. That's where it's come to.
Yeah.
So how
It,
different has this whole journey been? Like from start to now, where does MCP fit in?
when MCP first came out, it had two transport protocols, the two ways of communicating between an MCP client and a server.
Mm-hmm.
One was DIO, which is literally plain text locally, and the other was SSE, server sent events. Right now, SSE has been a little bit difficult to develop with, and there has not been a lot of. I mean, at least when it came out, there was not a lot of like SSE servers where the
Right.
server is like hosted remotely, and you just like communicate through
Right.
HTTP. So
I
now,
remember
so
Supabase was in SSE, setting it up through SSE because they were very, very early in getting their one of their MCP servers out.
yeah. And so now, if most MCP servers are STDIO, then they have to be installed locally. If they have to be installed locally, they're sort of
Mm.
open source. You can go
Oh,
instance
yeah.
things. Um, so that's like how it's evolved. But the problem is,
Mm.
for most people, for MCP to be more than just a interesting developer tool, it
Mm.
has to be very easier to install.
Exactly.
I would not expect most knowledge workers to want to even interact with the shell, do an npx
Yeah.
all package, clone a GitHub repository. It should be like very easy to do that.
Yeah.
And so now it's like going towards that where you can just get a URL and paste it into whatever, and then
Oh, nice.
sort of the connection and it works.
Oh, that's
Uh,
interesting. In fact,
yeah.
that's really good. And I have like a few thoughts that came up from the last part, right? First off, there's it reminds me of the times where there's API and there's endpoints. And then if you know that this API supports this endpoint, then obviously you can play around with the data. It's possible to integrate. And it's sort of looks like it's a rub off from the API world. So what's it really like? Is it like the AI part, AI tooling has integrations, and that's what MCP is? Or how different is MCP from the context of having APIs and integrations?
Yeah. So you can definitely look at it in the sense of you will need. So it's going back to context, right?
Mm.
If you want to feed context into a model, you can just do it any way you like.
Right.
You can just use tools directly. But you can also just use MCP servers because then it's like nicer frameworks now supported, IDEs now supported. And so adding just a single URL versus adding all the MCP server code, which like manages the API, manages the auth flow, manages the endpoint, which is a lot of work. It's like it's basically a trade-off. How I would look at it is that
Mm.
just want to use APIs directly. And by APIs, I mean you take an API, you convert it into and transform it into a tool that
Mm.
LLMs directly. Then that gives you a few things. It gives you much more granular control because you can
Right.
decide how endpoints work. You can compound different endpoints together, and you
Mm-hmm.
basically have control. And you can also manage the auths in a much easier way there.
Right.
Um, I would say you should use tools directly and APIs directly if you want the agents and tools to interact and live quite closely, and you want to modify tools and you want the agent to modify what tools it uses. But
Right.
MCPs is something I would recommend if you want to move a lot faster. You don't really want to do the work of controlling APIs to tools because so like what
Right.
Composio started off converting these APIs into tools that LLMs can call.
Exactly.
And then when MCP came out, we sort of just took that and wrapped it with MCP and gave it to people.
Nice.
So there's two types of people who use this, which is, hey, we want a lot of control, so we will use tools directly. And then the other
Mm.
type is, hey, we don't really like, we just want what you've built. We just want the MCP. We don't want that
Mm.
overhead of interacting and like creating these tools. So they use the MCPs directly. And
Right.
people who build with MCP have the optionality to switch out with a better MCP server later on.
Yeah, that's true.
Uh,
Right. And to me, in my mind, what comes to it is that the MCPs are like a very extended version of a combination of these endpoints, right? What we call as endpoints, I feel like those are the tools. Like the whole control of those endpoints is getting transformed into the tools part of MCP. And like you said, so what was intriguing for me was, hey, with APIs, there is control, but isn't the case with MCP where I'm transferring that control to an agent or I'm transferring that control to another tool and saying, hey, now instead of me trying to, let's say, take an example of Notion, trying to say this particular file and this particular action that you have to do, I'm just giving you a bunch of these files and then I expect the AI to kind of figure out what to do with that data. Isn't that the case with MCP?
Yeah, that's definitely the case, and I think it sort of goes back to how you design agents, which is
Mm-hmm.
where you had to be very granular. You have to tell it what to do, and you have to like very specifically add tools. Now, as LLMs are getting better and like agentic frameworks and ways to interact with agents are getting better, you can just throw it 10 to 15 tools, and those tools have to have like good descriptions. They have to
Right.
be designed very well. Like the schemas have to be very designed very well. The errors that you get, the responses that you get have to be designed very well. But once you
Okay.
do that, um, those tools can be interacted and fed into the agent directly, or they
Mm.
can be provided it through an MCP, like an MCP interface, right? But all of it goes back to the tool design. Like an MCP server does have tools inside, and if the tools are not implemented properly, it doesn't really matter. It's gonna suck.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. And in fact, as we're speaking, I'd love to see an example of, and for folks who listening to this as well, how would this whole MCP structure look like? And how does it make it different from APIs? Because we're talking about how APIs are more rigid or like it serves its own purposes, but MCP is slightly beyond and has like a wider context. So do you mind like showing a bunch of examples of, oh, like this is how, and let's pick a tool as well, right? Like if you think that that makes the process simpler, we could like pick a certain tool, as in like a certain app, and see how an MCP server that's available for the app looks like and what's it really, in action.
Yeah, I can. So, how I would draw the parallels is actually every MCP server will call an API. It's more of how the tools are abstracted away,
Hmm.
and I can just show you how Composio does these things.
Sure.
Um, Share my screen. Cool. So this is what like a tool and like a bunch of tools look like in Composio. So if you look at Gmail, right,
Hmm.
these are all have. And you can check this out that hey, this is like fetch emails, and this is what the fetch email tool takes in as parameters. It takes in like the label IDs, it takes in like how many emails you want to return, and whatnot. And like this is what the schema sort of looks like, the input schema and the output
Yeah.
schema. This is a tool. This will get transformed into an API call, right?
Right.
And that
But this also looks very similar to endpoints, right? Because API endpoints are usually defined this way, where you would say it would look like a field structure and then you would give like a description to it.
Yeah, for sure. Because I mean, in the end, all of this has to be converted into an API call. And so it has
Right.
to, so, and what Composio actually does is it converts these API endpoints into tools. So
Oh,
what you
right.
see in emails is actually like an endpoint in Gmail's API,
Correct.
probably called
Correct.
one email / list or something, right?
Correct.
Uh, So they're very closely tied together. It's just that
Hmm.
they're abstracted in a way that LLMs can understand what to do there,
Right.
what are the parameters to send. Because what endpoint to call and what auth token to send is
Yeah.
not concerned about. They have to be concerned about like
Correct.
which tool, what
Yeah. What's the
parameter.
outcome you really want from the tool? And yeah, fair enough.
But if you go a level of abstraction higher and like this is
Mm-hmm.
tool, you go to like an MCP server, you
And hey,
basically like
wait, for MCP server, sorry, for MCP server, the auth part is also handled that way, right? Because we're talking about APIs where we have to do like a authorization and there's like API key and then bunch of those stuff to do. But what we say here with MCP is that that part also gets handled.
yeah. So with tools directly, you need to obviously like handle auth, because say this wouldn't work, fetching emails wouldn't work if like it didn't have the
Gmail Connect.
yeah, the auth context of the user whose email has to be fetched, right?
Yeah,
So that definitely has to be handled on tools level, on a
right.
tool level. And that also is something what like Composer does. That's why like we just like let you
Okay.
play with it,
Okay.
right? You get to MCP server, the problem doesn't get solved automatically. because MCP support with auth is a little bit rigid. It can let you auth with your own thing. Like if you go to, I believe, Notion MCP. Yeah, if you go to like Notion's MCP implementation over here, what you need to do is like add in your own like auth secret over
Yeah,
here.
secret key. Yeah.
You have to go in and like do the work of like adding in your secret, adding in your keys, right? But the alternative is like what how we do it at
Hmm.
Composio. That hey, just throw in the MCP server URL, and then we'll take you through the auth flow, and we'll take you through our own auth flow, so that you don't really have to do the work of like going in and like
Right.
adding it. This is very helpful for people who are building agents that thousands of people will use. Because if I'm using Notion's MCP server, I
Hmm.
can't build an app that thousands of people will use, because no one is going to do this. No one
Right.
is going to
Right.
integration. This needs to be handled by the MCP server in a more graceful way. So
Right.
this is currently sort of like in spec. It's not like fully implemented. That's why like you
Hmm.
have to that's why like when you go like that's why like the Composio MCP servers
Right.
like you way of doing auth, and that
Right.
makes life.
So it's like thinking about it as when people, such as the app builders like Notion, build their own MCPs. They sort of do it in a one-off way that perhaps has some of these extra steps. But we just spoke about the single URL MCPs, right? Where folks like Composio and your team is building to get that process slightly simpler. That's. Am I like getting it right?
Yeah, exactly. Like how this looks like is I can just share my screen
Yeah.
again.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What this looks like is, hey, these are the MCPs that you have, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you want to like create a server, you can just do that.
Okay.
Um,
Can we like walk through an example like that, like just to I mean,
like
it would really be good to know. Okay, we saw Notion's code and how the setup has to happen on their page. So how is it really different here with the one-click setup?
yeah, so yeah, I can just like walk you through how it works, which is like, okay, first it's you can see that there is a few MCPs where an account is connected and a few where it's not. I'll
Yeah,
take you through the, like
sure.
Notion thing. I want like a Notion MCP server ready. It asks me how the authentication, like how I want the authentication to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here I'll just do because that's like the easiest way to do things. And then I can just create the server. Once I do this, what Composer does is that it actually prepends an auth flow as and when you start using the server.
Okay.
So the agent itself does the work of like going and taking you through the authentication flow. Let me set up like a few things so that I can showcase this properly.
Sure. And in fact, as you're just walking through this, could you also, for folks, like I said, most of them being web coders and just trying to understand the basic steps of MCP, like how does this whole, there's model, there's AI model in one picture, there's context that you feed to this AI tool, but there's also a client and there's also a server. So how does this whole orchestration work with an MCP? Can you also like walk us through that as you're just showing this around?
Yeah, I can do that. Let me just set the server up.
In context to understand before we start, there's the server can be added to any of your IDE, right? Like the client part, which is your cursor or Windsurf or Claude mainly.
Yeah. Actually, it also depends on which MCP servers you actually prefer using.
Okay,
Um, the, which MCP clients you prefer using, because I'm someone who like yeah, I'm someone who prefers like say the Z editor or a Claude code as like better MCP clients.
right.
Rather um
Right. But it also depends on which MCP you're trying to connect, right? Like, for example, if you're building out an app and you're perhaps connecting like a super-based MCP server, it makes sense to do it in a like an environment where you're actually building a database versus, let's say, you just want to talk to a Notion or talk to your Airtable or something like that. Then I think the Cloud, the interface is much more cleaner to do that. I have one more, sort of a noob question here, which is, as you're setting it up, there's the in ChatGPT or in Claude, there's also like a bunch of deeply integrated systems like connect to your Google Drive, connect to your Box. Some of that are very natively led integrations, which is a very old school SaaS way, right? So, how different would connecting to an MCP versus, let's say, connecting to your actual Google Drive and then clipping some of your docs and sheets through that versus, let's say, running an Airtable was through an MCP? They're not very different, right? Like ultimately, it's the same thing.
Yeah, it's so if I understood your question correctly, like why can't I just like do the feed the context indirectly? If
Yeah,
I'm
like I
using
mean, what I'm thinking about is that there's the same Claude also in Google Drive case, or in particularly like Google's context case. It was not through an MCP, right? They did build like a very native, like
oh,
auth with your Google Drive sort of a thing. So yeah, like can't that also be like an MCP to your talking to your Google Drive? Like why?
for sure. I think the Google Drive and the GitHub integrations were I'm willing to bet that they were actually early stages of testing MCP out. Uh,
Okay,
they didn't really build like they this like the concept of MCP was evolved and built through those early tests of like connecting your personal stuff to like the cloud app.
right. So the
Uh,
context that you said, which is like if that context is fed, how well the models work is
exactly.
interesting.
Okay, cool. Sharing my screen.
Sure.
Okay, so
Okay.
in Composio, you sort of like don't really need to worry about the entire like setup of, hey, where do I configure this? Where do I put this? We give you like secure URL and commands that you
Okay.
can add into cursor or whatever. So once
Right.
you this is just a simple npx command that like when
Yeah.
you wait, yeah, when you run, we sort of like just install the MCP server to cursor.
Right.
So once I run this,
Mm-hmm.
and I go back to cursor, I can see that, hey, these are all the tools that like show
Uh-huh.
up on. So
Nice.
you don't have to like go in and like edit those config files yourself, but you can if you want
Right.
to.
Right. So
What
this is how it's different from, let's say, if you had originally used Notion's MCP, then it's like you're taking a branch of their GitHub repo or something like that, and then seeing this as a part of the code.
No, I would just like add it over here, and, like switch the URL, switch the SSC URL to this over here, and then I would
Okay.
use it. Um, but like you can also just add the URL yourself or like run the npx command which you want.
Right.
Calling MCP server is like while it's a little janky, it's quite straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is that people shouldn't have to install something or anything
Right.
because people will be non-technical that
Yeah.
use things.
Yeah.
So here, like, if I had to like show you how the auth with MCP server works, it's
Mm-hmm.
um uh like connect with option. So how Composio does it is that we sort of like authenticate you directly while using the MCP server. So if you see that I didn't really go in and like
Hmm.
authenticate the server and the agent is taking me through the auth flow itself. And that's like nicer because no one has to like set that up
Right.
and add in the MCP server. And then after like a couple of seconds, I just get like an auth
Right.
URL to, and like once I do that,
This is similar to the usual logging in part.
exactly. So once I do that, I just get like this Notion screen and then I select my pages and I give it access to all of them.
Ah,
Um,
sweet. Hmm.
and once that's done, I can just say that, hey, uh, can you tell me which workspace I'm in?
So
Now
this
that it's
literally skipped the API key generation that we saw in Notion.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So you don't have to do any of that.
Right.
That's something to make people's life easier.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see that it's like able to run the tools as well. So it's
Yeah.
calling. No. Yeah, it's like telling me about my Notion workspace and like bot
Sweet.
ID. Whatnot. So I'm in the
Nice.
Composio. That's like one of the flows we offer. Alternatively, you can also just take your users through a more deterministic OS flow.
Mm-hmm.
To the user, to the end user, it will seem very seem very
Right.
similar. Like they don't have to go in and like juggle with like get
Right.
it and then
Right.
adding things.
So it's like a nice packaging that you've done on top of like setting up an MCP server to serve
Idea is
it.
to make the developer experience of people building with MCP servers easier and also helps them make the user experience of
Fair
them
enough.
building. And that's
Right.
like what we're trying to solve here.
Makes sense. Now, just going back, yeah. So now let's say I want to understand what are the capabilities that I can access with Notion, the tools that we were talking about. How do I get to know with this MCP server that this is what I'm entitled to do, or these are the set of outcomes I can get through this MCP setup?
Oh,
And
okay.
that's also
So
like,
that's super simple. When you create a server over here,
right?
um, basically get to choose connect. I'll just show you. You basically get to choose what tools
Oh,
you can
nice. Got it. Oh, okay. Got it.
let you choose that. Hey, you know what? You might want this. You might want this.
Right.
Um, one way. We also like to compound servers together. So maybe this is like your, outreach server, right?
Right.
This outreach server could probably use Outlook, and then it could use like list Outlook attachments, create a draft reply. It could use maybe Twitter. Uh,
Yeah.
it could use maybe HubSpot.
Right. This is
And
interesting.
so what
Because one of my
can do?
next questions was that, like, how can you connect multiple MCP servers together?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
nice.
so this is instead of like connecting multiple MCP servers together, because we are at the tool layer,
Right.
we can abstract tools from different apps into one MCP server. So they have Outlook, Twitter, HubSpot, and Airtable in like one MCP server that
Lovely.
I've created. And once I do create that, I can just take this URL, and then I can take this URL and I can like plug it into the MCP thing over here, which is like this.
Ah, nice.
So here, like I didn't have to really like go in and like do a lot of work into getting
Hmm.
different servers from Outlook, from
Yeah.
and I think many of them don't really have official MCP servers either. So this
Yeah.
is this is like you can compound different like use cases together.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And I think it's going to be very helpful as well because just as you rightly pointed out, not every app at this point in time have an MCP server. So which also means that you folks go ahead to build like an MCP server layer on top of whatever
Yeah.
existing endpoints people have just to facilitate that, right?
Yeah.
Nice. Nice. So just this is just a kind of a hot take or perhaps like just what you think it's more worth for is I do see there's announcements of um App A, App B, App C coming up with their MCP servers every day. And at this point in time, it's definitely a news like how the whole PR system works, right? Because MCP and most of these MCP releases are turned around to be a great PR for the particular brand. But that said, what you just showed me with Composio is also like being able to easily pick and choose some of these tools together. So, what's your thought on if somebody is building the next MCP with all the data that they possibly can expose to the AI tools versus let's say very custom finely working with you folks on getting this server up for them through Composio. What's it really going to be like? Should apps launch their own servers, or what's your take in that?
I think it's going to be the best MCP server wins.
Okay.
And because there's a separation, that's a beautiful thing, right? There's a clear separation of like responsibility here. The person who makes the the best coding agent, or the best general agent, the best personal agent,
Hmm.
people, and now the people who make that agent, they will only use the best MCP server. So then it's like up to the MCP server developers. Now those may be the official app developers or third party people, but whichever is the best MCP server with the best tools and like the best, most flexible implementation, those are the servers that end up getting used, right? Now here it's like Cursor, right? There's like plenty of GitHub and Outlook and Notion MCP servers out there, but which are the ones that give that like have the best performance, give me the most flexibility, let me select the
Right.
tools, and also like have high accuracy, low failure rates. So it might depend, like it might be that like an app developer might release an MCP server themselves because they have the most context for like how they want to do
Correct.
things.
Correct.
But that's very good for them. That's quite helpful. But there's also a real possibility where they don't do that, and them not doing that actually like might hurt their usage because less and less
Mm.
people might end up using the service, or they might just use a third party to use the app. It's sort of like where the moat is.
Mm.
Where I don't see MCP servers or MCP as a protocol being any real threat to these apps anytime soon. But
Right.
you can extrapolate to a point where, hey, if like, what if MCP servers are the only way that I interact with my Notion?
Yeah.
And now if I have a good MCP server, I
Yeah.
might we're not there yet. And definitely like there's a big moat that say like Notion has that like keeps me from switching. But if
Mm.
every app goes AI first, and I'm interacting with just like literally one MCP client, which is like my
Right.
personal, um, I might like not use a service that doesn't let me use it agentically.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like I build my own tool stack. Similar to that, I build my own tool stack, but as an MCP, where, oh, like this is my work stack, this is my personal stack, and I have
Yeah.
like controls to these tools in each of these stacks. Yeah.
And like if
That's,
everything is native, if it's not pluggable to
mm,
your agent stack, then sorry, it's like it might not be. But also I think enough people will make the MCP servers for it. So it's like
yeah.
uh, might not be that big of a threat.
Yeah. This is very interesting because it's also like different versions but same app, right? The fact that there could be multiple MCP servers. There's Composio's MCP server. There's also like the native app's own MCP server. There's like a bunch of other, probably like vibe coders doing their own set of MCP servers for a certain app. So even for Notion, there could be like 5 or 6 such MCP
I
servers existing.
I think the clear differentiation is that you know how you go and like use the Notion directly. You go and use Notion's app directly for your own for your own things. But if you're say or you can like take GitHub or Gmail for example too, right? You go and use those things for your own self. But if you're a developer who's making an app that uses Notion, that like say has this workflow where it creates Notion pages based on your emails, right? Now, as a developer, you don't use the Notion app, you use the APIs, right? So there will be a clear differentiation, I think, between MCP servers for personal use and MCP servers for like
Mm,
I guess development use.
right.
Um, Also, MCP servers are definitely like very friendly for developers to use and build apps on top of, because as you can see, the compounding, the OS flows and whatnot. So
Right.
it might be that hey, you're this person who wants to use a personal agent to work with like MCP servers. So I'll just use the official Notion MCP server. But when it gets to a point where you're building and you want other people to use your agent, and then that has an MCP server inside it, you'll use like like an external MCP server, or like the yeah, you like use the OAuth version of the MCP server that lets people like log in, or you know that.
Right. So there can also be like coexisting. No,
I
I
think
could
they
still use MCP servers for, and perhaps like from what you say, it's also widely adopted only in personal cases so far, right? Where when I'm interacting with the LLMs and I need more context to fetch between the multiple tools, as opposed to let's say I'm building it for a tool, and in that case, I still like tend to use APIs, or at least so far, for the whole setup to be like pretty robust so far, at least.
yeah yeah yeah.
Right.
Uh, that, and also like you can definitely um, see that like what, at least from what we have seen at Composio, it's that there's people who building with MCP servers,
Mm-hmm.
but the people building with like the core tools is a lot more. And so for us, we see that okay, MCP servers are more of a consumer thing right now.
Right.
Um, they're not very like yeah, like developing with them is like
Still
a
in
little bit,
motion.
yeah, still in the works.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And for someone who's looking to, let's say, set up their own server, like for example, for not for another tool, but for something that their own building. Let's say I have an app, and hey, and I'm thinking that I want to expose my server and have folks use my tool through any of these mediums. What's a good starting point for me? Let's say, for example, I'm one of those AI builders who've been like doing this app building with AI coding agents. So all I kind of know, understand is, oh, like I perhaps need to have some sort of a Python code, but what is actually my starting point if I want to build my own MCP server?
Yeah, I think the MCP protocol docs is like very helpful because it literally just gives you a prompt that you can copy into Claude or Cursor or whatever,
Oh,
and it
nice.
builds out like the agent can just go in and build the MCP server for you, given that you have the abstractions for like for your app built out, right? If you have the
Nice.
API set up. So building out MCP servers isn't that difficult, or at least I would say building out the MCP interface is quite easy.
Mm,
It's it comes back to good engineering as well, right? Good MCP server means a good good engineering would mean a good MCP server. So
mm.
the interface part is like quite easy, but building that abstraction, build and engineering that abstraction is definitely like up to the person who makes it.
Right. And by abstraction, what you mean is those the packaging units that we discussed, which is what should the
Right.
prompts be, what should the construct be, and the tools, like what tools need to be exposed, and those sections, right?
What
Okay.
the logic of the MCP server, how it's like routing things, how it's like working.
Yeah, pretty much like PMing your MCP server, like really going down to like what you really wanted to do. One piece of a prompt, it's possible to have an agent do this entire MCP server stuff for you. That's pretty insane. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Also, like, yeah, as we come towards the last part of the talk, I also want to dig deeper into right now. There's client mediums like Cursor, Windsurf, as we spoke about, and of course, Claude being the originator of all of this. But there's also, do you see other forms of support for MCP coming through? What's it going to be like from a long-term success of this protocol, and just from your own working versions? And especially like you've also been chatting with folks on the ground, right? So would love to get your takes on it.
Yeah, like the the protocol has good adoption now. I think the best way I would describe it is that I was talking to Simon Wilson, and he sort of like take was I was not sold on MCP until ChatGPT released the support for it. And
Mm,
so that's like the killer thing, which is like, okay, MCP has now won.
mm,
Um, now that everyone has adopted the protocol, or that people are not making competing protocols,
mm.
now the system can go in and flourish, and people who want to be involved on the protocol level can go in and like help out and do that. I think Microsoft is definitely involved, and it's like it's an open protocol, right? So anyone can actually go and read the GitHub discussions, contribute to the issues, help people spec it out. So I think it's definitely here to stay, and it's going to evolve much more, especially now that like everyone has come to an agreement that okay, MCP as a protocol is like here and it's going to stay,
Right.
at least for a bit till another.
Yeah. Oh wow. That's so true. Yeah. Until another wave comes in to say, oh, like, did you just think MCP was the ultimatum, and here's how it is not.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
hope is also that like once many players come into discussing and specking out a protocol, things slow down quite a bit. The
Mm,
roadmap, the roadmaps become longer. Um, like already the next few features that MCP wants to release, which is this interesting thing called sampling and
mm,
called roots. they won't be released for at least a few months, and so like the timeline
Right.
has moved weeks to months now.
Okay.
Um,
Why so?
just it takes time for specifications to thrive out, get
Right.
fetched out, and
Right.
get like you need a lot of the people or the adopters in on the conversation.
And this is the
So
Anthropic team working on it, right? Like by
actually, so how MCP is being built is that there's a few people who are working, not a lot actually, just like a few people who are working directly in on the protocol stuff, but
okay.
they collaborate very closely with other people from
So
say
okay.
Microsoft. Doc,
Oh, okay. So
uh,
it's not just one company, but a bunch of them who are working together is what you mean.
in a collaborative manner, and I think like um, yeah, that's why I also think that in 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 a little bit of time things might slow down because you know
Hmm.
people trying to like
Right.
working with the protocol.
Right.
So but I would say like yeah, AWS, Anthropic, I think Cloudflare, Microsoft, Okta,
Yeah.
Open. These people are definitely in on the MCP conversations.
Right. So you definitely mean to say that this is going to expand beyond the three or four that we see today, the clients that support MCP protocol, but I think it's going to become much more broader. Like I have this weird theory that maybe like SaaS apps, particularly the ones that you mentioned, like Cloudflare or even Okta and bunch of these SaaS platforms. Why don't they like automatically become the clients, right? Like today we're talking about putting these URLs into IDEs, but what if SaaS applications themselves become, uh,
Huh.
yeah,
That's really the beauty of the protocol, which is that hey, making tools should be hard and it should be like
mm,
um tools should be built well, but making MCP clients is like way more harder.
yeah,
Um because you're uh because you're building like an entire agentic flow, it has to be general purpose, it has to not break, it has to be like very good. There's a reason why even though people keep saying that, hey, there's so many forks of VS Code now, there's only like three arguably that are actually good, you know.
yeah,
So making good MCP clients is hard. And the
right,
reason it sort of blew up was also because Cursor gave in support for the MCP protocol. And when that
yeah,
happened, things
that's true.
started like
Yeah, I think otherwise it would have just been a very anthropic effort and just inside like how, Claude Code or Artifact is, it would have just been a very a Claude driven thing.
yeah, yeah. And the other thing is that it is picking up a little bit,
Hmm.
but also it's about delegating authority, right? Why would Okta want to build an agent system
Right.
to Okta things, or why would Cloudflare want to do an agent system to do Cloudflare things where when it can just expose the tools, it can just expose the resources prompts in an MCP server, and then let the user use it wherever they want to, right? So then Cloudflare is an agentic platform for you to interact with because it gave an MCP server. It's not making the clients itself or inside, right? So
Right. So sort of like doing the MCP, but also becoming the client in itself. So like combination
yeah,
of both.
like it's basically like clients are harder because clients are actually apps that you use on the daily, and making any app that you use on the daily is
Yeah. Yeah.
but
I mean, the beauty of that is using it from a place where you kind of hang out every day. And that's honestly ChatGPT, Claude, and nowadays Cursor too. So yeah, which is why it makes more sense to like put it there. But maybe like just a long horizon part of it can also be just as we do one-click integrations within SaaS platforms, maybe the one-click integrations would transform into agentic, MCPs rather.
yeah, yeah,
Right.
for sure.
Wow. Fun times ahead, I guess. Yeah. So what's your like as we close the session, like what's your favorite MCP servers so far? Like what have you been like hacking around with and using every day?
I think the most usable MCP server or the most useful MCP server that like I've seen being used or like I've sort of come across are like just a Postgres MCP server.
Right.
Because like I don't want to write SQL commands, but I also want to like naturally just like find things out and like do things. And the
Yeah.
other would be like Context 7 has this MCP server that gives latest documentation for the frameworks that you're using.
Oh,
Um,
nice. Mhm.
so then many times the LLMs and agents have this problem where they refer to older documentation, or they like
Mm,
use not the latest framework way of doing things. So Context 7 like tries to fix that by just like giving an MCP server.
yeah.
Uh, in that MCP server,
Node.js really needs this. Like happens a lot of times with
yeah, yeah,
Node.js.
yeah. Yeah, I think Context 7 just like has it for all documentation, all frameworks and tools, right? But apart from that, like my sort of like take is that MCP is quite nascent. I've not met a single person who uses an MCP server on the daily. Um, and it's just because like it's like hard for things to be very, very useful and usable. That's not to say that there's like a bunch of MCP servers that are like very useful.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just that like the UX is still not there yet. And like the functionality is still not there yet. But like I think Cloud Code is amazing, and I use a bunch of MCP servers
Mm,
in on. Um, it's actually much nicer to like work with, I think, code editors and MCP servers. So
yeah.
I, I think I've definitely loaded in like GitHub, Notion, Gmail, and I think Linear and whatnot into Cloud Code.
Nice.
Uh, and given it access to like an entire like repository or folder, and told it that, hey, like go crazy, because like you can do whatever the hell you want. Because I think coding is just like more general purpose and more generic, so it's able to do a lot more.
Very nice. Yeah, that sounds super promising in terms of just having like different tools talk to each other. And yeah, like just summarizing a lot of this is get very specific with bringing in these tools, and especially from a consumer point of view, try and explore a lot of these one-click MCP servers thanks to Composio. And I heard you also mentioned that general purpose MCP format is also becoming one click, right? Like it's also like becoming a one click URL. So that, and of course, like if you really want to wipe code and set up your own MCP server, then there's already like a construct for it, and perhaps like use the prompt, summarize, and yeah, the definite part of knowing what tools to expose and all of that is going to be some work. Wait, do you actually have to have APIs in the first place to start with MCPs, or you just have to like,
Depends on what MCP server you're building. Like you can just have an MCP server that tells the current date and time, right?
Okay.
And
But
so
to expose your data, you need to definitely like have your own APIs in the first place.
it's like if you're using an API for a tool, you need an API. Like yeah, it's
For
like
yeah,
the MCP server you're building.
yeah.
There's some MCP server that just like help the model think more, and
Okay.
sort of like calls the tool, and then it like injects a prompt in and like does a thinking
Oh,
step. So it's an
nice.
MCP help the model think a little bit more. So totally depends on what the MCP server is doing.
Nice. Okay, yeah, that's a cool tip. Like whether it's a tool-based MCP server or something that just adds more relevance to the model in itself. Interesting. Awesome. Sid, thank you so much. This was fantastic, and loved all the examples that you shared. It was very practical, and I think that's perhaps like where I was getting at with, hey, like what really is MCP? And thank God you didn't mention like a USB-C kind of a thing, but you actually showed what really happens behind scenes. And yeah, for folks wanting to check out getting started with MCP servers, I think Composio has like this great way to do like a one-click head start with a lot of these tools for non-tech folks as well, like folks who are not coding but would love to like connect to different apps on their everyday client interfaces like ChatGPT and not ChatGPT still, right? Like with Claude and with Cursor and Windsurf,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you can like on the dashboard itself, like we just give you like a one-click command to like install it
Nice.
most of the MCP clients. And apart from that, like it's just an SSE URL, so you can go and plug it in into any
Right.
MCP client that you're making yourself.
Sweet. Nice. Awesome. Thanks again, Sid.
Awesome. Yeah. Happy to chat.
Yep, I'll connect folks with you over the show notes, and yeah, you'll get DMs if folks are very curious about MCPs.
Yeah, sure, of course.
Thank you.
Uh, nice chatting with you.
Yeah.
Like hopefully talking to you soon.